I once believed we had the kind of marriage others would envy. 7 years without any major arguments, filled with inside jokes, weekend brunches, and a quiet, wordless understanding that made it feel like we were meant to be. I remember the mornings when he would bring me coffee in bed, or the lazy Sundays we spent doing nothing but enjoying each other's company. Love, to me, was supposed to feel just like that, comfortable, familiar, steady. He was the kind of man everyone would describe as safe, dependable, soft-spoken, and good with his hands. He always seemed to be thinking ahead, planning for the future. Our families adored him, and our friends referred to him as the perfect husband material long before he proposed to me. And I agreed. He was everything I thought I needed. When he slipped that ring on my finger, I felt chosen, blessed, and lucky. At least, that's how it all started. But somewhere along the way, comfort turned into complacency. Life became a blur of dinner routines, work deadlines, and silent TV nights. Something shifted, though I didn't notice it at first. I'd talk about my day, and he'd nod, but his eyes would drift off, distracted. He stopped asking about my day, stopped laughing at my jokes. It wasn't in a cruel way. It was more like he wasn't even aware of the change. I'd catch him staring at his phone while I spoke, and when I asked him what was wrong, he'd simply say, "Nothing, just tired." At first, I didn't think much of it. Life gets busy, people get distracted, I told myself. But the distance between us grew, slowly at first, like a fog that would eventually suffocate us. I'd reach for his hand in bed, and sometimes he'd pull away without realizing it. I stopped talking as much, and he didn't even notice. One night, I stood in front of the mirror, makeup half done, wondering if I still looked like myself. Did he even see me anymore? I walked out wearing his favorite dress, hoping for something, a spark, a reaction. He looked up briefly, smiled, and said, "You look nice." It wasn't the kind of compliment that made me feel cherished, more like a quick observation, as though he were checking the weather. I started staying late at work, volunteering for things I used to avoid. Not because I loved them, but because it felt better than coming home to someone who had forgotten how to truly look at me. Still, I convinced myself that we were fine. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't cheating. He paid the bills, hugged me goodnight, bought flowers on my birthday. It wasn't a bad marriage, but deep inside, I was starving for something I couldn't quite name. Looking back, I think he noticed before I did. He saw the little ways I pulled away, my smiles that no longer reached my eyes, the way I would look past him instead of at him. I didn't realize how far I had fallen, but he did. And the worst part, he didn't say anything. He just watched, silent. Then it started with a message. Innocent, friendly, and casual. He was someone I worked with on a project, nothing out of the ordinary, but he remembered the little things. He asked how my weekend went, and actually listened to my response. When I replied, he asked follow-up questions. When I vented, he understood without trying to fix it. It was so small at first, so easy to justify. Just conversations. Just company. But it became more. He made me laugh when I hadn't laughed in weeks. I found myself waiting for his name to pop up on my phone, refreshing the messages like a teenager waiting for a text. I told myself it was just nice to be seen, but he noticed things, my tone, my mood, the pauses between my words. He told me I had a spark in my voice when I talked about writing, something my husband used to say years ago before everything became routine. I didn't plan for it to go any further, but with every exchange, something inside me started to change. I began to confide in him about how lonely I had been, how disconnected I felt. He didn't push, didn't pry. He just listened and said something so simple, yet it stuck with me. "You deserve more than silence." That line kept echoing in my mind, looping over and over again as I lay beside my husband at night, both of us staring at our phones, pretending nothing was wrong. It rang in my ears during dinners eaten in silence, during kisses that had turned into habits rather than acts of affection. The man I was texting didn't make promises or hint at anything romantic. But the way he looked at me, like I actually mattered, felt like air after drowning. The emotional line between us blurred without me even realizing it. I began deleting messages, hiding notifications, wearing guilt like an invisible perfume. I told myself I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't kissed him, hadn't touched him, but we both knew what it really was. The first time we met outside of work, it wasn't planned. I was upset over something trivial, and he offered to talk. I agreed too quickly. We talked in his car for hours. I cried, and he reached over to brush a tear off my cheek. For a moment, the whole world seemed to fall away. I didn't kiss him, not that night, but I wanted to. After that, the barrier between us shattered. Messages became flirtation, lingering touches, and then more. I found myself craving him, craving the way he looked at me, like I was something to be desired, not just tolerated. I thought I was still the woman I used to be, that the art of me hadn't completely faded. But when it finally became physical, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like something inevitable, something I had no control over. I told myself it was passion, not betrayal. I wanted to believe I was reclaiming something that had been taken from me. But deep inside, even as I let myself feel alive again, a part of me still felt empty, hollow. I wasn't choosing love. I was escaping the emptiness. And still, every night I returned home, smiled, cooked, kissed my husband goodnight. I thought I was hiding it all so well. But I never once stopped to ask myself if he already knew. The affair didn't stay hidden for long. I began slipping, coming home later than I said, dodging questions, offering half-truths. He never accused me. He never raised his voice. But I could feel his gaze on me, steady, unblinking. Like someone watching a fire they already knew would eventually burn the house down. That silence, that quiet calm. He knew long before I was ready to admit it. I kept waiting for the confrontation, for the explosion, but it never came. Instead, he grew quieter, kinder even. He made dinner more often, asked if I needed anything, complimented me out of nowhere. But it didn't feel sweet. It felt like goodbye, and panic began to creep in. One day, I opened my phone and saw something that didn't belong. My messages mirrored what I had tried to hide, old but enough. He hadn't said a word, but he had watched, like someone letting the clock run out. The guilt hit me all at once, sharp and sickening. All my denial collapsed. I had built my betrayal on the assumption that he was blind to everything. But he wasn't blind. He was broken. I tried to pull back, to end it, to create some distance. But I was already too deep. The other man, though patient and kind, had real feelings. Feelings I hadn't anticipated. And I had lied to everyone, including myself, about what I could handle. I couldn't keep both. I couldn't be half in anymore. The guilt consumed me every second of the day. I couldn't sleep, couldn't lie beside my husband without feeling like a stranger in my own skin. I began imagining the worst, him reading every message, watching every secret unfold, all while pretending not to see. The shame became unbearable. So I decided to confess. Not to be noble, not to repair anything, but because I couldn't keep living in that false, weightless space where everything looked normal but nothing was real. I needed the truth to breathe again. I sat across from him, rehearsing my apology, but the words crumbled before they could leave my mouth. He looked at me, and it was as though he already knew everything I was about to say. No anger, no accusations, just a deep, tired sadness. I admitted everything, the texts, the feelings, the nights I said I was working late when I wasn't. And when I finished, when I waited for the outburst, the questions, the rage, I got none of it. He just looked at me and said, "I know. I've always known." Then, after a long pause, he added, "I watched you fall out of love with me. I just didn't know how to stop it." In that moment, everything shattered. It wasn't the cheating. It wasn't the confession. It was the realization that he had already let me go a long time ago, and had done it so quietly, I never heard the door close. The next morning, he left without a scene, without an argument. No bags thrown, no final confrontation, just a suitcase packed by the door and a note that said, "Don't forget to water the plants." I sat on the couch for hours, trying to feel anything other than that hollow ache in my chest. I had imagined 1,000 different reactions, screaming, crying, maybe even begging. But instead, I sat in silence, watching the clock tick forward without him. The other man reached out, offering support, promising that we could finally have something real. But when I looked at him, all I saw was a reflection of everything I had used him for. He didn't feel like a rescue anymore. He felt like a mirror, showing me a version of myself I didn't recognize. I told him I needed space. He didn't argue. He quietly drifted out of my life, like someone who had always known he was temporary. I tried to go on with my life as if nothing had happened. Work, groceries, phone calls. I smiled when I had to, lied when it was easier. People asked about my husband, and I told them he was traveling. It was simpler than explaining how I had dismantled my own life, piece by piece. Nights were the worst. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was loud. It suffocated me, echoing with everything I had left unsaid, all the things I had failed to speak when I had the chance. I began listening for his footsteps, out of habit, still expecting his key to turn in the lock. But he never came back. Not once. He vanished completely, and I finally understood why. He had already grieved me long before I even started to miss him. I sent him a message once, just one. I told him I was sorry, not just for the betrayal, but for the slow, steady way I had disappeared, all while standing right in front of him. He never replied. I didn't blame him. I walked through our home, seeing the places where we had laughed, where we had built a life together. It wasn't perfect, but it had been real. And I had traded it all for something that disappeared the moment it was exposed to light. I kept searching for a reason, for something, anything, to justify it all. But in the end, there was nothing left but the quiet, unspoken truth. I had chosen to burn it all down.